Hello friends, welcome to AI Flux. Today, some really interesting things have happened in the world of Stable Diffusion. Specifically, Kickstarter decided to suspend the crowdfunding campaign for Unstable Diffusion. Real quickly, for those of you who don't know, Unstable Diffusion is an independent project that basically, as an act of defiance, has decided to deliberately make a model that supports certain spicy NSFW image generation models. They're just doing it on the principle that they think this should exist and that they think that the creative tenets of this technology should not be limited as they have been by Stability AI. Now, of course, there's some questions as to how far Stability AI has leaned into restricting or sanitizing the newer models they've released, like 2.0 and 2.1. But nonetheless, Unstable Diffusion is a really interesting project, and we're going to get into that. So first off, I want to go over the official announcement from Kickstarter that was released earlier today. It goes like this. Hello, this is a message from Kickstarter's Trust and Safety team. Again, safety is the key here, not really. We're writing to let you know that a project you recently backed, Unstable Diffusion, unrestricted AI art powered by Crowd, has been suspended. As a result, your $30 pledge has been automatically canceled and you will not be charged. No further action is needed. So this is something that someone received who had backed this project. And they go into saying, we take the integrity of Kickstarter very seriously. We only suspend projects when we find strong evidence that they are misrepresenting themselves or otherwise violating the letter or spirit of Kickstarter's rules. Which is also bizarre because tons of artists use Kickstarter and there have been far spicier projects that have been funded on Kickstarter in the past. We may also suspend projects when they are a subject of an unresolved intellectual property dispute and or valid intellectual property claim. As a policy, we do not offer comment on project suspensions beyond what is stated in this message, which is nuts. We know this isn't ideal, but we do sincerely hope to see you again soon. So this is a pretty bizarre message, and I think there are a few key areas where this recent event probably stemmed from. So the first off is that there's been a lot of shade being thrown at Unstable Diffusion from a number of angles. The lowest brow one are tons of quote-unquote artists on Twitter coming out just of the woodwork and claiming that Unstable Diffusion is a horrific thing that no one should use and that it's a risk to humanity and a risk to the art community. Which to me, I think is a little ridiculous because the scope of Unstable Diffusion is quite narrow. I think a lot of the people who have been shaming this either don't understand what it really is or don't have a grasp of what a lot of this technology does. The irony, I'm not going to show it on YouTube and I can't show it, but the irony is there are people who are saying this is obscene and something that shouldn't be on the internet who, for better or for worse, make very spicy, furry illustrations and things that I can't even show on my channel. And it's kind of ironic to me that this is meant to make fake anime generally. Like that's kind of one of the more early focuses of this. Like it's basically an extension of waifu diffusion. And initially, all of the money going to this project on their Patreon, where you can still support them, was basically being used to fund waifu diffusion to progress and see kind of how far that could be played out, and then also to fund what I think are some really novel technical innovations in the space, which is why I think it's unfortunate that this has been taken down, because clearly the impetus for most of this is it's technical in nature. It's not necessarily idealistic. Yeah, so I think it's interesting. So yeah, first attribute that might have done this are all the artists coming out of the woodwork who are making either false, malformed copyright arguments. I've read some of these arguments, and it's basically a lot of people who just don't understand how copyright works or how the legal system works, and to think that artists are going to come out and come up against even some of the greater legal discussions that have happened when it comes to how copyright in AI works is honestly laughable. I understand artists are kind of coping with a lot of this stuff. I don't see how this is productive, and I think if anything, it reflects really poorly on the Kickstarter brand. And granted, Kickstarter hasn't really been in a great light with the creative community for some time, but nonetheless, it's kind of interesting. So a really important comment to highlight here that I thought spoke pretty clearly is just someone making comments. So some time ago, I saw artist comments that wanted to mass report the Kickstarter to get it banned. I don't know if it actually happened or if it happened enough to have consequences, but it could be one explanation. There's also generally a consensus, since some other projects on Kickstarter that did AI stuff have been canceled. I don't think a lot of these can really be substantiated for now, but interesting, I think it's far more likely that it's just Kickstarter's legal team seeing too much risk, given some of the comments that have come from the White House. And generally, I think this sums it up quite well, which is saying we don't know the real reason, but look at this. Kickstarter just published a deliberate kind of press release on what they think about AI-generated art, which is, in my opinion, just complete cope. And ironically, that this was published by Everett Taylor, who's basically a sort of community of support / marketing person at Kickstarter. So this is someone they said, look, here's what we want you to say it in a nice way. And this was published today. And it is jam-packed with cope. So it says, I want to share some of our thoughts on artificial intelligence generated images and AI art as it develops, because many creators on Kickstarter are understandably concerned about its impact on the creative community. So in other words, just people who aren't willing to adapt being consumed by cope. Kickstarter must and will always be on the side of creative work and the humans behind that work. We're here to help creative work thrive, which is hilarious. Basically, it means that this community advisory council is highly biased and unwilling to really acknowledge the challenges of new technology. They make some interesting points here, like saying, is a project copying or mimicking an artist's work? We must consider not only if a work has straightforward copyright claim, but also evaluate situations where it's not so clear. That is just a bizarre, just benign statement. Does a project exploit a particular community or put anyone at risk of harm? This is fundamentally absurd, because we're approaching vague gray language that is basically saying if we think that there is an aesthetic that might even just be a style of art that you're generating with AI, then that is putting someone at risk, or it's putting the subjects at risk, which is unbelievably lowbrow and just really disappointing to see from a company like Kickstarter, who claims to be kind of progressive and forward-looking, or even more stunning as considering themselves to be a quote-unquote technology company. And they end it pretty weakly and limp-wristedly, saying this tech is really new and we don't have all the answers. The decisions we make now might not be the ones we make in the future, so we want this to be an ongoing conversation, which, looking at the email they sent everyone who gave Unstable Diffusion money, it doesn't really appear to be ongoing. It says you can share your thoughts by writing to suggestions@kickstarter.com, which I suggest any of you who are kind of confused about this do, as we continue to develop our approach to the use of AI software and images on our platform. And that approach for now appears to just be blanketly banning it and then not really explaining why. So there's a question here of, is Kickstarter more so acting as a gatekeeper? Is there a lot of legal heat that they're worried about? Or more so, are they worried about alienating their community of creators that generates revenue on Kickstarter? Quite frankly, Patreon, I think, has far more market share than Kickstarter does at this point, and is honestly, as a recurring revenue model, just makes more sense. Nonetheless, it's kind of interesting. Now that we've covered that, we're going to get a little deeper into what Unstable Diffusion is. We have a dedicated video coming out, but I wanted to go into another interesting angle of controversy and just criticism of Unstable Diffusion that is well written and, formulated better than a lot of the shrieking you see from artists online about Unstable Diffusion, but is in its own right just kind of a bizarre take, attacking some of the technical tenets of Unstable Diffusion, and more importantly, trying to kind of gaslight people into understanding why the model was created. So it goes like this. I see many people lauding Unstable Diffusion for their recent announcement of funding a not safe for work model, but I think the community should be a little more cautious when it comes to this group. I think there are a few red flags that should be addressed first before giving any money. So clearly they're worried about anyone supporting this. They're conflating giving money with support. The Kickstarter they announced was not made in response to Stability AI's decision to neuter the 2.0 model. Well, first off, this was, of course it was in progress because they were funding Waifu Diffusion before this. So then they say they actually have been planning to make a Kickstarter for a while, as seen in this article, for the purpose of creating a super specific new brands and products. Unstable Diffusion is a subsidiary of Equilibrium AI, a company created by the admin of the Discord server. He says that they will actively seek out venture funding for their company. There's no problem with that. If you don't understand how venture funding works, that's fine. This is expensive stuff to develop, and to formalize something I think is a really productive approach. So, and then the irony is that they say, how committed can they be to the community if they will end up being beholden to institutional investors just like Stability AI? So that's kind of an empty take there, if you ask me. They go on to make it sound like $3,500 a month to run something like this as being significant, which it's kind of not. It just reads like a college student who doesn't understand what like real expenses are, because like this is all a laughably cheap expense. Like this is you could fund all of this with one monthly Patreon payment. Like the real expense is developer time, servers, like GPU servers. Yeah, so this is like an armchair VC person who's saying like, I want to see where all the money's going, not just the $3,500 that's going to founders' pocket. And of course, like it makes sense to me that the developers behind this are saying that Unstable Diffusion will become their full-time job. And $3,500 a month is barely like one paycheck for one underpaid developer. So yeah, I'm kind of confused again as to what point this person is trying to make. They claim to be awarded a 5-figure grant to expand their model training infrastructure. If they're seeking venture capital funding, already have a 5-figure grant from a compute provider. Basically what they're missing here is that I believe the real value behind behind Unstable Diffusion, other than its idealistic value and its sort of shock value of saying like, we're going to do exactly what Stability AI doesn't want us to do because we can, is their very novel and new means of deploying infrastructure to do Stable Diffusion things. That is worth way more than a lot of just the model itself, right? Like they would be more than happy just to give the model away if it means that they can push and test a new way of deploying infrastructure behind it. That's what the value is. And again, this person's just totally missing it. Bonus red flag. Their final overpriced Patreon tier promises stock in the company if we incorporate paid position and general guarantee that they. So this, anyone like I think this is a little sketchy. I think it's kind of unwise for someone to do this. It seems like the kind of thing a college kid would come up with, just like there were NFT projects that said, yeah, like if you buy our NFT, we'll let you take an equity stake. Chia also had kind of some weird claims like this saying, yeah, like if you get in before we actually launch our token officially, we can give you equity. So yeah, anyone who has any amount of due diligence looks at that. Is it worth discrediting the entire project? Absolutely not. I think anyone who would be looking at that tier will probably just contact them directly through their own legal channels and then formulate an investment. Then the other thing that's weird with this is they take a total 180 and say, I appreciate the general sentiment behind Unstable Diffusion's actions and their apparent desire to help the community, but I don't presently see them as a legitimate group worth donating to. Even though they've created the model, they've deployed their infrastructure with this new system and platform they've developed, which is incredible. Then they say, it's just really a copy of Stable Diffusion 2.0. And then we'll end up in all the quarrels we had with that all over again. Then they conflate the Kickstarter failing as being massively detrimental to the community, which is ironic because Kickstarter at this point they themselves imploded the project. Again, sort of some circular logic there that doesn't quite add up. Yeah, of course, everyone should do their due diligence. Again, like what's crazy with this post is initially it had everyone's real names in it, which is weird. And the reason I bring up this post, I know I've just been thrashing this post, but what's interesting is a lot of artists would reference this when people would ask, well, what is your actual, what is the argument, what is the basis for your argument for saying why this shouldn't exist on the internet? Quite frankly, I think there are probably more legitimate arguments as to why like furry fan fiction shouldn't be on the internet than why Unstable Diffusion shouldn't be. There are a few very vocal voices in Japan and with people who do anime art that are very vocal against this, but I think like with anything, there will always be those voices. And as a person who develops technology like this, I think it's worth really thinking deeply as to whether or not people like that should be able to completely silence development. Now I want to show you the actual Kickstarter. Somehow this is still up. So again, like what they start out with is their like the technical tenets of what they're doing. Like the coolest thing about this, other than its idealistic intent, is they say, right here, one of the key features of our project is the creation of a community GPU cloud, where researchers and community model makers can request compute grants and train their own models and datasets on our system. provided they will release the results open source. So it's a very interesting take, similar to what Stablehorde has done. And I think we're going to start to see really interesting implementations moving away from centralized compute providers. And I think that is really the next logical step with a lot of this technology. So they first say, making educational materials, sort of an alpha model, the next generation model. Again, the reason these costs are going up is because they incrementally need more and more hardware. If you look at the balance sheets of companies that are currently doing AI stuff that release their VC documents publicly, the biggest line item on their expenses is always infrastructure. Stability AI has been very public about this, that the biggest expense they had was renting NVIDIA A100s. And you can see here, they say purchase 4 RTX A6000s for our GPU research cloud. They probably meant RTX 6000s. That's $28,000 right there. And then they mentioned buying more GPUs. And so they're building their own infrastructure. And what they should have mentioned more is that as they buy more infrastructure, this is actually benefiting backers as well as part of this community GPU cloud. How well they end up, managing this, I think we'll have to wait and see. But really, this money is being used, I would say 80 to 90% of it is being used to orchestrate these GPUs, provide infrastructure, because, the API interface to this is likely in something like AWS, since you're pushing enough images back and forth that doing that in AWS makes sense, and then piping that into your own GPUs is important. There's nothing here saying we want to make a crazy model that just makes boobs. They're building some models and some data sets that maybe some people would have problems with, but the irony is all the people who have problems with this deal with content that is far more problematic and just controversial than what this is meant to do. So I'll link to the Kickstarter below. I've archived this, so even if Kickstarter takes this down, it'll still be up with the link below. The pledges here, I think, are pretty reasonable. And of course, going forward, if the people working on this project see this, don't mention equity before you've done a fair bit of legal work. There's just no reason to enter that headache, and it does kind of degrade how much trust people might have in you. That said, this project has pushed the technical boundaries of a lot of infrastructure bits of Stable Diffusion, and I think it's awesome. I commend the work going on here. Ironically, my most popular video is still the Waifu Diffusion video, and quite frankly, the most vigorous, clean development I've seen by a single person is the guy or whoever the individual is who worked on Waifu Diffusion. So I commend people who are working on the infrastructure side of this and working on this project. I think the idealistic value is very present. If it's even more present now because people are even more mad about it. And yeah, if you disagree with me, please let me know in the comments. If you want to guess how much an RTX 6000 will cost, put it in the comments as well. And as always, I hope you learned something, and I'll talk to you guys later.